I always say to youth workers, I think one of the most important things that we do is to help young people make meaning out of their lives. And I think this starts with us, making meaning out of our lives. What is our vocation? What is our calling? And to come alongside kids with their questions and their doubts, and be there with them, not to provide them all the right answers, provide the information that they need to get to the right answers necessarily, but to walk with them in that confusion, chaos, doubts, the questioning, the wonder of this thing we call life. So I think I'm really fascinated by the project of discussing the importance of the relationship between science and faith, because science is such a big issue. It dominates the cultural landscape. And for too long, the narrative has been that science and faith are at war. And there's always going to be tension between science and faith. In some ways, they're asking different kinds of questions. But there's so much beauty and interesting opportunities to help young people engage with faith in the midst of a scientific culture. And I think the bottom line, the conflict is not going to end by we just got to have better science. The conflict is going to be reduced to a proper tension with a better Bible hermeneutic. And I think this is one of the things that we do in the midst of when they have all these questions like, why is this happening, or why does the Bible say this but science says this, to engage them in that conversation. Once again, not to provide the answers, but to help them to begin to read the Bible in a different way, it's that faith-seeking understanding. And so I think this is really, really important. And kids are fascinated with science and with mystery, and they're curious about these types of things. And it's just tragic that so many in the church have a posture of this battle kind of narrative between science and faith. And I just like to jump right in with kids in that conversation, in the midst of our questions, and engage in how do we not reconcile, but how do we work this stuff out with what we see in the world and what we read in the Bible. And I think kids are really interested in that. So I think helping young people make meaning out of their lives in the world, and why they even have a life, and I think it's really important. I think another thing that's really important for us is to really try to curate and nurture the kind of environment that allows for inquiry, that allows for questions, so that no question is really off limits or stupid, or even making a kid feel like that's not an appropriate question to ask. Like that, the church should be a place where we bring all that stuff and engage in theological discourse and theological reflection, and try to figure out, well, this is what science says, what the reality that we think we see is what the Bible says. It feels like they're not compatible, and yet, so what does that look like for there to be some compatibility? How do we read the Bible in the midst of this? What are these stories really telling us? And I think that's also critical, but we have to be a non-anxious presence in that. And that's really difficult for youth workers, because in the church, there's so much anxiety and fear, and it's coming from the administration sometimes, it's coming from the parents, it may be coming from the grandparents. But what are you doing with our kids, and what are you talking about with our kids, and how can you make our kids better and toe the party line, and yet the kids are wanting to push the boundaries of that party line. And how do we do that? And how do youth workers that are just starting out, how do they do that without losing their job, right? and so these are the challenges that I think we face in youth ministry today in the church, in this current cultural reality that we find ourselves faced with.